The moment Inez Kingsley realized the stagecoach was never coming back, she understood with cold, bone-deep certainty that she was utterly alone in the middle of the New Mexico territory, with nothing but a carpetbag, a broken heel on her left boot, and a sky so enormous it felt like God was mocking her. It was the spring of 1878, and the Santa Fe Trail was still the artery through which the lifeblood of the American West pumped, carrying merchants and dreamers and desperate people in equal measure. Inez was firmly in that last category. She had come from Missouri with a letter of employment tucked inside her corset, pressed close to her heart like a prayer, promising her a position as a schoolteacher in the small but growing town of Cimarron. The letter had been sent by a pastor, Elias Dodd, who ran the only church school between the Cimarron River and the mountains, and who had assured her in careful, looping cursive that she would be welcomed, housed, and fairly compensated. She had not anticipated that the stagecoach driver, a rat-faced man named Burrell, would leave her on the roadside after she refused to let him rifle through her bag, looking for the gold coins he had somehow decided a schoolteacher from Missouri must certainly be carrying. She had not anticipated that her protest would earn her an unceremonious shove from the running board, her carpetbag thrown out after her, while the horses continued on without so much as slowing. She had not anticipated that her heel would snap clean off when she landed on the rutted earth, or that the nearest shade would be a scraggly juniper tree some 40 feet away, or that the afternoon sun in New Mexico territory was something entirely different from the afternoon sun in Missouri. But there she stood. Inez was 24 years old. With thick chestnut hair she kept pinned severely at the back of her head because she thought it made her look more authoritative, and brown eyes that tended toward amber when the light hit them at the right angle. She was not a soft woman, not in the way people sometimes meant it. She had grown up hard, the eldest daughter of a farmer who had died in debt when she was 16, leaving her to care for her 3 younger siblings while her mother worked herself thin trying to keep the land. She had taught herself to read properly from borrowed books, then taught herself well enough to teach others. She was competent and serious and slightly too proud, which she knew and occasionally regretted. She picked up her carpetbag, studied the empty road in both directions, and chose to walk. The direction she chose was west, because Cimarron was west, and because standing still in the New Mexico sun would kill her before stubbornness would. She had perhaps a mile of walking done, her broken boot thumping unevenly on the packed earth, when she heard the hoofbeats. She turned, shading her eyes with her hand, and saw a single rider coming up the trail behind her. He was moving at an easy canter, not in any particular hurry, and he sat in the saddle the way men who had grown up on horses sat, as though the horse were simply an extension of his own legs. As he drew closer, she could make him out more clearly. He was perhaps 27 or 28, lean and brown from the sun, wearing a dusty brown hat pulled low over his forehead. He had a dark stubble along his jaw and eyes the color of weathered cedar, a kind of gray-green that she noticed even from a distance because they were unusual. He wore a blue chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and a leather vest over it, and he had a pistol on his hip that looked like it had been used and cleaned many times. He slowed when he saw her, pulled his horse to a walk. She squared her shoulders and gripped her bag and prepared to be ignored or pitied or both. He did neither. He stopped his horse beside her and looked down, unhurried, taking in the broken boot and the bag, and the fact that she was standing alone on an empty road in the territory with her jaw set like she was daring the landscape to inconvenience her further. "You need a hand," he said. His voice was low and unhurried like the rest of him. "I need to get to Cimarron," Inez said. "The stagecoach left without me." He did not ask why. She appreciated that enormously. "I can take you as far as Rayado," he said. "That is about 6 miles on. There is a trading post there, and Dawson Briggs runs mules to Cimarron 3 times a week. He could see you through." Inez looked at him. She looked at his horse. She looked at the road, which showed no sign of becoming easier or shorter. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, and I intend to accept it, but I want to be clear that I am not someone who is easily trifled with." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to it. "I imagine not," he said. "Name's Noah Archer." "Inez Kingsley," she said. He swung down from the saddle in a single fluid motion and offered his hand to help her up. She took it, put her foot in the stirrup, and pulled herself into the saddle with practiced competence. Because she had grown up on a farm and knew horses, though her skirts made it awkward. He handed up her carpet bag, which she set across her lap, and then he took the horse's bridle and began walking. "You do not have to walk," she said. "Horse can carry one comfortably enough for 6 miles," he said. "Carrying 2 would slow us, and I would rather make Rayado before dark." She could not argue with the logic, so she did not. She sat and watched the landscape roll by, all rust-colored earth and sage and the distant purple suggestion of mountains, and she tried to make sense of Noah Archer. He was not a talker. That much was immediately apparent. He walked the horse with patient, measured strides, and he did not fill the silence with noise for the sake of it, which she found unexpectedly comfortable because she had always found compulsive talkers exhausting. But he was not cold or distant either. When he spoke, it was with purpose, and he looked at her when she spoke to him with his full attention, which was a rarer quality than people seemed to understand. "What takes you to Cimarron?" he asked, after they had covered perhaps a mile. "Teaching position," she said. "Pastor Elias Dodd runs a school." He nodded. "I know Dodd. He is a fair man, strict but fair." "That is reassuring," she said. "What brings you from Missouri?" He asked, which surprised her because she had not mentioned Missouri. "How did you know I was from Missouri?" He glanced back at her over his shoulder, and this time the near smile was more definite. "Your accent mostly, and the way you are dressed. Good quality fabric but made for a milder climate. You are already sunburned." She touched her cheek without thinking, then dropped her hand, annoyed at herself. "My father's farm failed," she said, deciding honesty was less trouble than pride in this particular situation. "I needed work. I am good at teaching, and Missouri was not offering enough of either." He nodded again, accepting this without commentary or sympathy, which was exactly what she wanted. "And you?" she asked. "What takes you toward Rayado?" "Heading home," he said. She waited for elaboration and received none. She decided that was fair enough. They walked and rode in that comfortable silence for another mile or so before she noticed that he was scanning the ridgelines with a particular kind of casual steadiness that had nothing casual about it. She had grown up around men who watched their land for signs of trouble, and she recognized the habit, even translated into this wider, wilder landscape. "Is there something to be concerned about?" she asked. "Probably not," he said. "There have been riders cutting through this stretch recently. Could be rustlers, could be nothing. I'm not worried, just attentive." "That is a polite way to say you are watching for trouble." "It is an accurate way to say it," he said, and this time the near smile was entirely audible. The trading post at Rayado materialized out of the late afternoon dust like a practical miracle. 3 low buildings arranged around a hard-packed yard, a water trough, and a corral with 6 mules placidly ignoring each other. There were 2 other horses tied at the rail outside the largest building, and smoke coming from a chimney pipe, and the smell of something cooking that made Inez suddenly, desperately aware that she had not eaten since early morning. Noah led the horse into the yard and tied it at the rail. He helped her down, and she was grateful for the help because her left leg had gone partly numb from the awkward position in the saddle, and she did not want to fall in a heap in front of him. She managed to dismount with dignity, which felt like an achievement under the circumstances. The interior of the trading post was dim and smelled of leather and tobacco and dried beans, and it was run by a woman named Cecilia Montoya, who was approximately 60 years old, enormously wide and completely without interest in other people's opinions. She greeted Noah with the familiarity of long acquaintance and sized Inez up in about 3 seconds. "She needs Dawson Briggs," Noah told Cecilia. "Going to Cimarron." "Dawson went yesterday," Cecilia said. "He will not go again until Thursday." It was Tuesday. Inez absorbed this information and made the practical calculation. 2 nights in a trading post in the territory. She checked the amount of money she had, which was not generous but was enough, and she turned to Noah to thank him and explain that she would manage from here. He was already talking to Cecilia about whether there was a room available, with a matter-of-factness that suggested the conversation had an obvious conclusion that he had already reached and was simply communicating. "I can arrange for my own lodging," Inez said. "I know you can," he said. "I am arranging it faster." He looked at Cecilia. "2 rooms if you have them." Cecilia looked between them with the expression of a woman who had seen every possible combination of human beings passing through her establishment and had opinions about most of them. "I have 1 room with 2 cots," she said. "And the barn." Noah looked at Inez. "I will take the barn," he said, in a tone that made it entirely clear he was not making an offer for debate. "That is not necessary," Inez said. "It is cold at night here still in spring," he said. "The room with the cots is warm. You should take it." She looked at him for a moment, measuring the offer against her considerable pride, and found that the pride was slightly outweighed by the memory of how cold Missouri nights could get even in late spring, and how much worse the territory could be. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and went attend his horse. Cecilia showed her to the room, which was small and plain and had a wooden floor and a wash basin and 2 narrow cots with blankets that smelled of cedar, and Inez sat on the edge of one and pressed her hands to her knees and breathed carefully. She was safe. She was fed shortly, because Cecilia had indicated supper was coming. She was 2 days from Cimarron, and then she would have her position and her purpose, and her plan would proceed as designed. She would thank Noah Archer properly at supper, and in the morning he would continue to wherever he was going, and she would wait for Dawson Briggs on Thursday, and this entire strange detour would become a story she might someday tell in a classroom, if the children were old enough to appreciate irony. That was the plan. Supper at Cecilia's table was a revelation. The woman could cook with a simplicity and authority that made the food taste like it had always existed exactly this way, like it was the only correct version of itself. There was a beef and bean stew with dried chilies that made Inez's eyes water pleasantly, and cornbread, and coffee that was extremely strong and completely unapologetic about it. There were 4 other people at the table beside herself and Noah. 2 were traders heading east, a father and son named Rupert and Cal Sears, who smelled of horses and talked over each other constantly, but without apparent irritation. The 4th was a quiet Mexican man named Hernando, who Cecilia treated with the affectionate authority of a woman, dealing with a nephew she was fond of but would not coddle, which suggested he was probably her actual nephew. He worked at the trading post and had the particular competence of someone who had been taught to do a thing properly, and then simply did it that way, every time. Noah sat across from Inez, and she found herself noticing things about him over the course of supper that she had not had the angle to notice while he was walking and she was riding. He had a scar along the line of his jaw on the left side, small and pale, like an old story told very briefly. His hands were calloused in a way that spoke of rope and reins and hard work, but he used them carefully at the table, without the roughness that sometimes accompanied that kind of history. He listened more than he spoke, but when he spoke, other people listened, because he tended to say the thing that was actually useful rather than the thing that was interesting, and in practical company that was valued. "You know this territory well," she observed, when a lull in the Sears family's conversational duet created an opening. "I grew up here mostly," he said. "My father ranched about 30 miles north of here. I went away for a few years, came back." "Why did you come back?" He considered this in the way he seemed to consider everything, as if the answer deserved the respect of actually being thought about. "Because it was home," he said. "Some things are simpler than they appear. And some things are more complicated," she said, because the automatic counterpoint was in her before she could stop it. He looked at her with those weathered cedar eyes. "Yes," he agreed. "That too." After supper, Inez excused herself and went to check on her boot, which she had been managing on the broken heel all day and which was becoming genuinely problematic. She sat on her cot and examined it and concluded that without a cobbler's tools she could not repair it, and a cobbler's tools were not something Cecilia's trading post offered. There was a knock at the door. She said, "Come in," and it was Noah, holding a length of rawhide cord. "If you give me the boot," he said, "I can wrap the heel tight enough to hold until Cimarron. It will not be comfortable, but it will be stable." She looked at him. He was leaning in the doorway with the easy posture of a man who had no idea he was being considered, which she found both irritating and strangely appealing. She handed him the boot. He sat down on the floor of the narrow hallway and worked at it with patient, practiced hands, wrapping the leather cord around the broken heel in overlapping layers, pulling it tight, testing it, adjusting. She watched him work and found she was thinking about his hands again, which she told herself was simply professional observation of a skilled task. "You have done this before," she said. "A few times," he said. He did not look up. "You travel a long way alone." "The whole way," she said. "From Jefferson City. I had a letter from Pastor Dodd which gave me confidence, and I had my own common sense which gave me rather more." He made a sound that was definitely a laugh this time, though a quiet one, like he kept them in reserve for moments when they were genuinely earned. "Your common sense seems reliable," he said, though it did not prevent the stagecoach situation. "No," she said. "That was my backbone, actually. My common sense told me not to argue with a man twice my size who was already in a mood. My backbone overruled it." He looked up at her then, and something in his expression was different, more open. "What happened?" he asked. She told him. The whole story, concisely and without excessive drama, because the story was dramatic enough without embellishment. The driver named Burl, the demand to search her bag, her refusal, the shove, the abandoned road. Noah listened without interrupting, and when she finished his jaw had tightened just slightly, which was the only indication he gave that the story had affected him. "He had no right," Noah said. "No," she agreed. "He did not. I intend to write a letter to the stagecoach company when I am settled, for whatever that is worth." "It may be worth something," he said. He handed her boot back. She examined his work. The heel was wrapped tightly and securely, and when she pressed against it with her thumb it held firm. "Thank you," she said. "You are unexpectedly handy." "You are unexpectedly forthright," he said. And now the smile was fully there, without reservation, and it did something significant to his face, opened it up, made him look younger and more alive. And Inez felt something shift somewhere in her chest that she firmly decided was gratitude and nothing more. She went to sleep in the cedar-smelling room and dreamed of Missouri, which she had not done in several months, and woke before dawn with the particular clarity that early mornings in unfamiliar places sometimes produce. Wednesday in Rayado was longer and stranger than she expected, because she had no tasks to complete and no schedule to meet, and idleness was not something Inez Kingsley was built for. She found Cecilia in the trading post's main room shortly after sunrise, cataloging stock, and offered to help. Cecilia looked at her with frank assessment, and then handed her a ledger book and said she could copy entries if she had neat handwriting. Inez had extremely neat handwriting, so she spent 2 hours at the counter working through a backlog of inventory entries while Cecilia attended to the physical merchandise. And at some point, they fell into conversation without quite meaning to. Cecilia had lived at Rayado for 30 years, had outlasted 2 husbands, one Apache raid that she described as more terrifying at the time than in retrospect, a drought and a fire. She had opinions about the territory that were architectural in their thoroughness, and she had opinions about Noah Archer that she offered without being asked. "He is a good man," Cecilia said from across the room in the conversational tone of someone picking up a thread that had always been there. "His father was difficult, not cruel exactly, hard. Noah grew up quiet because of it, but he did not grow up bitter, which says something. He seems even-tempered," Inez said carefully. "He is," Cecilia said, "but he is not soft. There is a difference." She paused. He helped rebuild this post after the fire 2 years ago. Did not say a word about it, just showed up with lumber and 2 other men and worked for 4 days. That is the kind of man he is. Inez returned her attention to the ledger. He mentioned he ranches north of here, she said. He runs cattle, Cecilia said. Has about 200 head now, working toward 3. He has a small house. He built it himself. Inez told herself she was simply gathering contextual information about the place she was traveling to, the kind of information a prudent person collected. She was not building a portrait of Noah Archer in her mind with any kind of particular interest. She was simply prudent. She and Noah crossed paths again at midday, when Hernando produced a lunch of tortillas and cold bean paste and dried beef that was simple and satisfying. And they sat at the outdoor table in the shade of a wooden awning, while the spring sun ran its course overhead. "How long until you need to be somewhere?" she asked him. He considered. "I told my hand I would be back by Friday. If Briggs takes you on Thursday, I could ride with you to Cimarron and still make it back by Friday evening." She looked at him. "You do not have to do that. The road between here and Cimarron is fine mostly," he said, "but you would be riding behind Dawson Briggs on a mule. He is a decent man, but he is not particularly attentive to his passengers, if you wanted company. If you are offering to ride alongside and see me safely to Cimarron," she said, "then I accept, and I appreciate it, and I will not pretend otherwise." He looked at her again with that quality of full attention. "You do not waste time on false modesty," he said. "I find it takes energy I could spend on better things," she said. "Sensible. I try to be." They sat in a silence that had gone from comfortable to something more specific, warmer and more aware, and Inez noticed it and set it aside with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had learned that certain feelings were simply inconvenient, because she had a position in Cimarron and a life to build, and she had already arranged the pieces carefully enough that disrupting them now would be foolish. Still. Wednesday afternoon, Noah found her sitting at the edge of the corral watching the mules with the contemplative expression she wore when she was thinking harder than the situation seemed to require. He leaned on the corral fence beside her without invitation and without asking, which should have been presumptuous but was not somehow. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "My mother," she said, which surprised her because she had not intended to say it. "When I left Missouri she cried, which she does not usually do. She said she was afraid I was making a mistake, going somewhere unknown for a stranger's promise." "Are you afraid of that?" he asked. She thought honestly. "No," she said. "I am afraid of staying somewhere small because I was afraid to try somewhere large. I would rather be wrong in motion than right while standing still." Noah was quiet for a moment. A mule at the fence examined them both with the philosophically indifferent expression common to mules. "My father used to say that the land would take everything from you if you let it," Noah said. "I think he meant it as a warning. For a long time I thought it was just bitterness. Now I think maybe he was afraid of loving it too much." "Did he love it?" "I think so," he said. "I think he could not say it, so it came out sideways as something else." Inez turned to look at him. His profile against the afternoon sky was serious and quietly beautiful, and she thought about what Cecilia had said, about a boy growing up quiet to survive a difficult father, and about the difference between quiet and soft. "Do you love it?" she asked. "The land?" He did not look at her, but something in the angle of his jaw eased. "I love it fiercely," he said. "I love it first thing in the morning when the light comes off the mountains. I love it in summer when the thunderstorms come up over the Sangre de Cristos and you can smell the rain before it gets to you. I love it even when it is trying to kill you, which it does regularly." "That sounds honest," she said. "It is the truest thing I know," he said. And then, quietly, as if adding a thought that had just occurred, "Until recently, anyway." The silence that followed that had a different quality than the previous ones, and Inez felt the warmth in her chest press outward like a coal touched with air, and she told herself for the second time that she was being imprudent and she should stop. She did not entirely stop. That evening, Cecilia produced a more elaborate supper. A whole chicken roasted with dried chilies and herbs, with roasted corn and fresh tortillas, because a merchant had arrived mid-afternoon with supplies and she was in a celebratory mood. The table was fuller with the new merchant, a portly and cheerful man named Walter Ames who sold dry goods and had opinions about everything and expressed all of them freely, and his companion, a quiet young woman named Rosario, who was his niece and clearly more intelligent than her uncle, and had simply accepted this as the condition of her life. The conversation at dinner was livelier than the night before, because Walter Ames was a natural entertainer, and because Cecilia, loosened by the celebratory occasion, told 3 stories about the trading post's more colorful visitors that had the table laughing. Noah laughed twice during supper, and Inez, who had been counting without consciously deciding to, found the number insufficient and wished he would do it more. After supper, Walter Ames produced a harmonica from his vest pocket and offered to play, and Cecilia moved the table aside, and there was, in the plain dirt-floored room of a trading post in the New Mexico territory in the spring of 1878, something that could be generously called a dance. Rosario danced with Hernando, who turned out to be an unexpectedly graceful dancer, with a particular combination of ease and precision that suggested early and thorough teaching. The Sears men, who were still present for the night, tried to dance together and gave up laughing. Cecilia danced alone with enormous satisfaction, moving with the authority of a woman who had been dancing her whole life and needed no partner to do it well. Noah stood at the edge of the room with his arms folded and watched, and Inez stood beside him, and Walter Ames's harmonica made something rollicking and impossible to ignore, and without quite deciding to do it, Inez turned to Noah and said, "Can you dance?" He looked at her. "After a fashion," he said. "That is a qualified yes," she said. "I will take it." She held out her hand. He looked at her hand for just a moment, 1 second, and then he unfolded his arms and took it, and they moved into the small cleared space, and he could dance after a fashion, which turned out to mean he knew the steps and had natural rhythm and moved through them without self-consciousness, which was considerably more than most men managed. She had danced before. She had learned in the church hall in Jefferson City, where the social events were modest but regular, and she was good at it, light on her feet and attentive to her partner. They moved together well, which was not something she had expected, though perhaps she should have, given that they had fallen into an easy rhythm of conversation that she had also not expected. Walter Ames, who was a perceptive man under the chattiness, played a slower song next, whether deliberately or coincidentally, and they slowed with it, and Inez found herself closer to Noah than she had been before, close enough to see the line of his jaw and the way his eyes went softer when he was not guarding them. And she thought suddenly, and with alarming clarity, that she was in serious danger of making this situation much more complicated than she had intended. "You are thinking hard again," he said quietly. His voice was low, meant only for her. "I'm trying not to," she said honestly. The corner of his mouth lifted. "Is it working?" "Not particularly." They turned with the music, and his hand was warm at her waist, and she could smell the cedar and dust and something clean and warm that was simply him, and she decided that she was going to allow herself this one dance in its entirety, and then she was going to be extremely practical. She allowed herself the dance. When the music ended, she stepped back and thanked him with a composure she was proud of, and he looked at her with those cedar eyes for a moment too long to be entirely practical. And then Walter Ames launched into something cheerful again, and the moment dissolved. She went to her room before she could create any more difficulties for herself, and lay in the cedar-smelling dark listening to the silence of the territory at night, which was not actually silent at all, but was full of coyotes and wind, and the distant sound of Walter Ames still playing his harmonica for an audience of no one in particular. She thought about Noah Archer for a long time before she slept. Thursday came with bright, decisive sunshine, and the arrival of Dawson Briggs at approximately 8 in the morning, driving a wagon with 2 mules and a load of supplies heading to Cimarron. He was a compact and weathered man in his 50s with a white beard and the look of someone who had been permanently calibrated to outdoor distances, and he greeted Inez's request for passage with a nod and a price that was reasonable, and told her to be ready by 9. She was ready by 8:30. Noah appeared at the wagon as she was loading her carpet bag, and she felt something in her stomach react to the sight of him that she again categorized as gratitude. He was already saddled, his horse ready beside the wagon. "You did not have to come," she said. "I said I would," he said. It was not an explanation. It was simply a fact. He said things and then did them, and she was beginning to understand that this was not a small or common quality. The ride to Cimarron took the better part of the day, because Dawson Briggs stopped twice, once to check a mule's shoe and once to deliver a small package to a ranch family along the route whose patriarch emerged from the house, and spent 20 minutes talking to Dawson about weather and cattle markets while Inez sat in the wagon seat and tried not to fidget. Noah pulled his horse alongside the wagon during these stretches when they were moving, sometimes silent and sometimes talking with the easy informality of someone who had been accustomed to long rides, and understood that conversation was not the only point of company. He told her about Cimarron, which was a real town, not large but substantial, with a hotel and several saloons and a general store and a church, and a school that Pastor Dodd was building into something genuine. He told her about the surrounding country, the Cimarron range of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the way the river ran in spring, the particular beauty of the light in the canyon. He did not tell her more about himself, not directly, but she gathered things from the way he talked about the land and the people in it, because he was the kind of man whose character was most visible in what he valued and how he spoke of it. He was fair-minded about people without being naive. He had a dry sense of humor that appeared reliably when she least expected it. He was genuinely curious about what she said, in the way that meant he was actually listening rather than waiting for his turn. She told him about teaching, about the particular challenge and satisfaction of the moment when something clicked for a child who had been struggling, the way their face changed, the specific light that appeared behind the eyes. She told him about her siblings, Marcus, who was 21 now and working a mill, Sarah, who was 19 and had just gotten married to a farmer named James, little Pete, who was 12 and who she worried about with a specific intensity because he was the most like her. Noah listened to all of this with his full attention and at one point said, "You miss them," simply without making it a question. "Every day," she said, "but I do not regret going. I can send money home, which I could not do there." "You are taking care of them from a distance," he said. "I am trying to." He looked at her for a moment. "They are lucky to have you," he said, and it was so direct and simple that she did not quite know how to respond to it, so she thanked him quietly and looked at the road ahead. Cimarron appeared in the late afternoon, materializing from the dust, and the mountains like a practical answer to a question she had been asking since Jefferson City. It was more substantial than she had imagined from the letter, with a main street that ran a good 2 blocks and buildings of actual adobe and wood on both sides. There was noise and movement, horses and wagons and people going about the business of a working town, and the mountains rose immediately to the west in a way that was so dramatic it was almost theatrical. Dawson Briggs pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store and began unloading with the efficiency of long practice. Inez climbed down, her bag in hand, and looked at the town that was going to be her life now, and she felt the particular mixture of excitement and terror that preceded all genuine beginnings. Noah swung down beside her. She turned to him, and he was looking at the town with an expression she could not quite read, and then he looked at her, and the expression became clearer, though she did not yet have words for it. "This is as far as I go," he said. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was not entirely steady. She had known he would say it. She had been bracing for it since Rayado, since the dance, since somewhere on the road between there and here. She had known this was the end of his company and the beginning of her destination, and she had told herself it was perfectly fine, because she had been going to Cimarron for a reason, and Noah Archer was simply a very kind man who had helped her and was now going back to his cattle and his ranch and his life, which had nothing to do with hers. She believed this for approximately 3 seconds. "I know," she said. Her voice was also steady. She was proud of it. He looked at her with those weathered cedar eyes and the near smile that was not quite a smile, and she could see him doing the same thing she was doing, measuring something against practicality and finding the practicality slightly lighter than he expected. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you did. The boot and the escort and the company. It mattered." "It was not a hardship," he said, which was understated in a way she was beginning to recognize as his particular idiom. She held out her hand. He took it and held it for a moment, and his hand was warm and calloused and completely specific, not like anyone else's hand, and she thought about telling him something true and then decided it was too soon and too complicated and she had a position to secure and a life to begin. "Maybe our paths cross again," she said instead. "I expect they will," he said. "It is not a large territory." She almost laughed. She did smile, fully, without reservation, the kind she kept in reserve for moments that genuinely earned it. He looked at her smile with an expression that she filed away to examine later. And then she turned toward the church at the end of the street where she could see the sign that read Dodd's School, and she walked toward her future with a broken-heeled boot wrapped in rawhide cord, and a heart that was being more complicated than she had authorized. Pastor Elias Dodd was exactly what his letters had suggested. A narrow, precise man in his 60s with steel-rimmed spectacles and a moral seriousness that stopped just short of severity. He welcomed her with genuine warmth, showed her to the small room above the church hall that would be hers for as long as she wanted it, explained the situation of the school with the thoroughness of a man who had thought carefully about everything, and expressed confidence in her abilities with a specificity that suggested he had actually thought about her qualifications rather than simply hiring warmly. The school served 23 children ranging in age from 5 to 14. They came from farming families and ranching families and the families of merchants, and a few from the Mexican families, who had been in the territory far longer than the American town itself, whose children were learning English with the practical urgency of people navigating a world that had changed faster than they had chosen. Teaching them all at once, in one room with one teacher, was a puzzle of logistics and priorities that Inez had been trained for and genuinely enjoyed. She threw herself into it immediately, because motion had always been her natural response to complicated feelings, and because the work was real and demanding and good. She wrote a letter to her mother telling her she had arrived safely, and the position was everything she had hoped. She wrote a letter to the stagecoach company about Burl, in careful, precise language that was all the more devastating for being entirely factual. She organized the classroom, wrote lesson plans, and introduced herself to the other residents of Cimarron with the combination of openness and quiet dignity that had always served her well in new places. She did not think about Noah Archer more than approximately once every 2 hours, which she considered an acceptable average. 3 weeks after her arrival, she was in the middle of a lesson on long division when the classroom door opened and Noah Archer walked in. She stopped mid-sentence. He was standing in the doorway, hat in hand, wearing the same blue chambray shirt and leather vest, and looking exactly as she remembered except that he had shaved the stubble, which made the scar on his jaw more visible and made him look slightly different and entirely himself. 23 children turned to look at him. 14 of them began to whisper. "I beg your pardon," she said, because she needed to say something. "Class is in session." "I know," he said. "I did not mean to interrupt." "I came by to see if you had settled in." She looked at him. He had ridden 30 miles or close to it to see if she had settled in. "I have settled in very well," she said. "Thank you." He nodded. He looked at the children who were looking at him with the absolute unfiltered fascination of children confronted with an interruption to routine. He looked back at her. "I will come back at a more convenient time," he said. "Supper is at 6, she said before she had decided to say it. "At the Dodd's kitchen, where the pastor and his wife take their meal with the teaching staff, which is me. Pastor Dodd will not mind an additional guest. He is hospitable." Noah looked at her for a moment. 6 o'clock, he said. 6 o'clock, she said. He put his hat back on, nodded once, and left. She turned back to the classroom, which was watching her with the complete, unsettling attentiveness of children who have sensed something interesting. "Long division," she said firmly. "Where were we?" Noah came to supper at 6, and Pastor Dodd was indeed hospitable, and his wife Marta, a warm and practical woman who had been managing the logistics of other people's lives for 40 years, took an immediate and entirely non-subtle interest in the situation. She gave Noah an extra portion of everything and asked him more questions in the course of one meal than Inez had managed in 2 days of travel, and discovered that he was 28 years old, had been born in the territory, had spent 3 years working cattle drives up to Kansas in his early 20s before coming back to start his own operation, had no living family beyond a distant cousin in Santa Fe, and made the best pan bread in the county, which he claimed and Marta challenged warmly. After supper, Inez walked with Noah to where his horse was tied at the church rail. The evening was cool and the sky was the particular deep blue that comes after a good sunset, studded with the beginning of stars, and the mountains to the west were purple shadows against it. "You did not have to ride 30 miles to ask if I had settled in," she said. "No," he agreed. "Why did you?" He looked at the mountains for a moment. He was not a man who said things before he was ready to say them, and she understood that now, so she waited. "I thought about the things you said on the road," he said finally, "about being wrong in motion being better than right standing still. I remember saying that. I have been standing still in some ways," he said. "My ranch, my cattle, my routine. It suits me and I am not complaining of it. But I was thinking that maybe I had gotten too accustomed to my own company and not accustomed enough to the other kind." She looked at him. The stars were coming out properly now, one after another, the way they did in the territory, with a speed and abundance that still surprised her after 3 weeks. "I would like to come back," he said, "to see you, if that is agreeable." She considered all the reasons it was complicated, which were genuine and real, and weighed them against the way her heart had done something specific and traitorous, the moment he had walked into her classroom with his hat in his hand. "It is agreeable," she said. He came back the following Saturday, and the one after that, and the one after that. He would ride the 30 miles on Friday evening and stay at the small hotel on the main street, which had 4 rooms and a strict proprietress named Mrs. Halsey who had opinions about unaccompanied women entertaining male visitors, which was not a problem because Inez was consistently not an unaccompanied woman when Noah called on her. They walked together in the evening, when the town quieted, and the mountains turned colors in the long western light. They sat in the Dodds' parlor on Saturday evenings, with Marta's enthusiastic approval and Pastor Dodd's more measured but genuine goodwill. They talked about everything. About the territory's history, which was complicated and layered, the Apache who had lived on this land for centuries before anyone drew a line and called it New Mexico, the Mexican families who were navigating a world that had changed its name but not its landscape, the American settlers who were building something they believed was permanent without always understanding what had been displaced to make room for it. Noah spoke about this with a clarity and fairness she found remarkable. He had grown up here, knew the land and its history with the intimacy of someone for whom it was not academic, and he did not simplify or romanticize. She told him about Missouri, about her father's farm, about the specific quality of the light there in autumn, which was different from the territory the way a fiddle was different from a guitar, same family of instrument, entirely distinct sound. She told him things she had not told many people, about the years after her father died when she was 16, the way fear had lived in her chest like a tenant she had to manage rather than allow to manage her. about learning to be effective at things because effectiveness was the only reliable currency she had ever had. He listened. He always listened. And he told her things in return, not in long speeches but in the particular way he communicated, carefully and with precision and trust. He told her about the cattle drives, about the loneliness of them and the beauty of certain mornings on the trail before anyone else was awake, standing in the dark watching the first blue appear at the edge of the sky. He told her about his father, more about him now, the complicated texture of loving and struggling with someone simultaneously. He told her that he had built his house himself not because he could not pay someone else to do it, but because he had wanted to understand what he was building. One Saturday evening in late June, they were sitting on the wooden bench outside the church when the air was warm and the fireflies were starting to show, which was one of the territory's minor miracles, and he reached over without ceremony and took her hand. She looked at their joined hands, and then at him. He was looking straight ahead at the street, as if he had done something perfectly ordinary, but the line of his jaw gave him away, the slight tension of someone who has done something important and is now waiting to see if it lands correctly. She interlaced her fingers with his. He exhaled and looked at her, and the near smile became a full and real thing, quiet and certain and completely specific to her, and she felt it move through her like the first warm day after a long winter. "I think," she said very carefully, "that you have become important to me." "You have been important to me," he said, "since you looked at a horse and an empty road and decided that walking made more sense than waiting. I did not know I was being observed." "You were not being observed," he said. "I just drove by and saw someone who had made up her mind." "That sounds like an ordinary thing," she said. "It is not," he said. He turned to her and he was very serious now in the way he got when something mattered completely. "Inez, I want to be honest with you." "Please," she said. "I'm a rancher with 250 head of cattle and a one-room house with a second room I built because I thought someday I might need it and no particular reason to think so at the time," he said. "I have 30 miles of empty road between me and the nearest town. I'm not offering you a small life, because the country out there is not small and neither is what I feel for you, but I am offering you something that will require you to want it." The fireflies moved in the warm air between them. Somewhere down the street a door opened and closed. The mountain stood dark and enormous and patient to the west. "You are asking me something," she said. "I am getting there," he said, and the brief flicker of that quiet humor was there even now. "I want you to come and see it, my ranch, before anything else. I want you to see the actual thing, not the idea of it, so that whatever you decide is a real decision." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are the most careful man I have ever met," she said. "I have made enough mistakes through carelessness," he said. "I do not intend to make this one of them." She was quiet for a moment, watching the fireflies. "Yes," she said, "I will come and see it." He brought her out the following Saturday on horseback, because the wagon road to the ranch was passable, but he preferred the direct route through the canyon, and she was a good enough rider that it did not matter. She had borrowed a proper riding outfit from Marta Dodd, who was approximately the same height and had a practical wardrobe, and she sat her horse well, because the farm had not been nothing, whatever else it was. The canyon he brought her through was one of the most beautiful things she had seen in her life. Walls of red and gold stone rising on either side, the Cimarron River running below them green and clear, cottonwoods along the bank throwing dappled light. She stopped her horse at a natural overlook and simply looked, and Noah stopped beside her and said nothing, which was exactly right, because no words were equal to what the land was doing. The ranch was small by the standards it was working toward, but it was genuine and cared for. A house of adobe with a stone floor and a fireplace, and 2 rooms exactly as he had said, and a kitchen that was rudimentary but functional, and windows that faced the mountains so that the morning light came in gold and clean. There was a barn in good repair and a corral, and the cattle were in a south pasture doing what cattle did, and there was a hand named Wallace, a stocky Texan in his 40s who had worked for Noah for 2 years and who greeted Inez with a weathered politeness that suggested he had been told to expect her, and had formed opinions already. She walked through the house slowly, looking at everything with honest attention. The furniture was plain and handmade and solid. The second room was empty, as he had said, with bare walls and a wooden floor. She stood in the doorway of it and thought about a schoolroom. "What are you thinking?" he asked from behind her. "That there is enough light in here," she said. "For reading," she heard him breathe. They ate lunch at the small table outside the kitchen door, Wallace included, and the conversation over bread and cold beef and strong coffee was easy and real, and she watched the way Noah was on his own land, the particular quality of ease and authority, and belonging that a person has in a place they have built from their own hands and their own intention, and she understood then with complete clarity that she loved him. She had been moving toward this understanding for weeks, in the careful, deliberate way she moved toward anything important, examining it from all sides, testing it against her own honesty. But sitting at that table in the sun with the mountains in front of her and Noah talking to Wallace about the south fence line with the comfortable familiarity of men who work alongside each other every day, it became simply true, without argument. She did not say it then. She carried it back to Cimarron like something valuable, held carefully. She told him in August, 6 weeks later, on a Saturday evening in the Dodds parlor after Marta had said good night with the transparent strategy of a woman who could read a situation perfectly well, and Pastor Dodd had disappeared into his study with similar purpose. "I need to tell you something," she said. He was sitting across from her, his hat on his knee, completely attentive. "I love you," she said. No preparation, no softening, just the thing itself, because that was how she was and she had stopped apologizing for it. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, something large and quiet and long contained. "Inez," he said, just her name. But the way he said it told her everything. He moved from his chair to the settle beside her and took both her hands and held them, and looked at her with those cedar eyes full of something she now knew was for her and only her. "I have loved you," he said, "since Rialto, since you handed me your boot with the dignity of someone who was absolutely not going to allow the fact that they needed help to be anything other than a practical matter to be addressed." She laughed fully and freely, and it was the best laugh she could remember, and he was smiling in return, the full version, the one that changed his face and made her feel like the sun had come out. "We should talk practically," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "We should." They talked practically, about the position with Pastor Dodd which she valued and did not intend to abandon carelessly, about the 30 miles between the ranch and Cimarron which was real and not nothing, about the future of the school which had become genuinely important to her in the months she had been there, the children's faces clicking into understanding, the satisfaction of it. Noah had thought about all of this, which was characteristic of him, and he had ideas. The territory was growing. The road between Cimarron and the ranch would improve. There was talk of a school in the smaller community that was developing near his ranch, which would need a teacher, though that was still a year or two away. In the immediate term, he thought that she should continue at Dodd's school for however long she wished to, and that the practical question of where she lived in relation to the ranch was one they could solve when they had decided on the larger question. "The larger question," she said. "Will you marry me?" he said. Not quite a question, not a statement either. Something in between, offered with complete sincerity and the specific vulnerability of a man who did not often let himself be vulnerable, and had decided this was worth it. "Yes," she said. She did not hesitate, because she had been thinking carefully for weeks and she knew her own mind. He kissed her then, for the first time, with the warmth and restraint of someone who had been waiting for permission, and was now thoroughly certain he had it. And it was quiet and sure and exactly right. And she held on to the front of his shirt and felt the steadiness of him, and was grateful for it in a way that ran all the way down to the bone. They were married in October of 1878, in Dodd's church, which was the only church in Cimarron, and which was the right place for it because Pastor Dodd had been quietly rooting for this outcome since the first supper, and Marta Dodd had been doing so actively, and without any concealment at all. Marta had strong opinions about wedding decorations and expressed them in the form of marigolds and dried sage, which made the church smell like autumn and the territory simultaneously. Inez wore a dress of deep blue wool that she had made herself from fabric Cecilia Montoya had sent from Rayado as a wedding gift, with a note in Cecilia's broad handwriting that said only, "I told you he was a good man." She had her hair pinned the way she always wore it, the way she had decided was authoritative and kept, because it was hers and she saw no reason to alter it for ceremony. Noah wore his best coat and a white shirt, and the specific expression of a man who is extremely happy and is not quite sure what to do with the magnitude of it, which she had never seen on him before and found enormously dear. They exchanged vows in front of the congregation, which was most of Cimarron plus Wallace and two other ranch hands who had ridden in for the occasion, and sat in the back row looking large and slightly bewildered by the flowers. Cecilia Montoya sat in the third row with the expression of someone attending an event they had forecast and were taking appropriate satisfaction in. Inez continued teaching at Dodd's school through the fall and winter, riding in on Mondays and staying through Friday at the Dodds, which Marta was enthusiastic about, and returning to the ranch on Saturdays. It was not a permanent arrangement, but it was a good one for the season, while the smaller community near the ranch was indeed growing, and Pastor Dodd was beginning to discuss the possibility of a second school. The ranch became her country in the same way Missouri had been her country, slowly and then completely, through the accumulation of specific mornings and particular lights, and the knowledge of individual things. She learned the personalities of the cattle, which was an education she had not anticipated and which Wallace found amusing. She learned the names of the specific mountains visible from the kitchen window, and when the snow came to them, and when it receded. She learned that Noah got up before dawn not because he needed to, but because he loved the morning, and that he came back for breakfast, and that this was her favorite part of every day, the two of them at the kitchen table with the early light coming in off the mountains. She wrote to her mother faithfully and sent money faithfully, and in February her mother wrote back a letter that was different in quality from the previous ones, warmer and more open, and which said among other things that she had been afraid for Inez and had been wrong to be, and that the young man sounded like someone worth having, and she was glad of it. In the spring of 1879, Inez wrote to her brother Marcus and to her sister Sarah and told them that if they ever wanted to come west, there was room. Marcus wrote back with interest. Sarah was settled with James and content, which was good to know. Pete, who was 13 now, sent a separate letter that was badly spelled and enthusiastic, and said he wanted to come as soon as he was old enough, which made her laugh and made Noah say, with a small smile, that they would figure it out when the time came. The school near the ranch opened in the autumn of 1879, in a building that Noah had helped put up along with several other ranching families in the area, because schools required communities and communities required investment, and Noah understood this. Inez became its teacher, which meant she was home every evening, which meant the temporary arrangement became permanent in the best possible way. She wrote to Pastor Dodd with both regret and gratitude, and he wrote back saying he had expected it and was glad, and that he had already had 3 inquiries about the position from teachers back east, and that her legacy at the school was the children who had flourished under her teaching, which was the only legacy that mattered. Their first child was born in the summer of 1880, a boy they named James, which was Noah's father's name, given deliberately and with intention, because Noah believed that the complicated things between him and his father deserved resolution in the most permanent way he knew, which was naming something new and beloved after them. James was a large and decisive baby who had his mother's brown eyes and his father's quality of appearing to evaluate everything before committing to a response, which made him simultaneously easier and more demanding than expected. Cecilia Montoya came to visit when James was 3 months old, riding in with Hernando, who turned out to actually be her nephew, driving a wagon loaded with supplies and gifts. And she held the baby with the authority of a woman who had held many babies and found this one satisfactory. And she told Inez that she had known from the first evening that it would come to this, which Inez accepted because it was probably true. Marcus came west in 1881, 23 years old and willing, and Noah put him to work on the ranch with the measured patience of a man who had been 23 and willing once himself. Marcus was good with horses and fast with figures, and had their mother's stubbornness and his sister's capability. And within a year, he was managing the ranch's finances with a competence that freed Noah to focus on the cattle operation, which was now growing toward 350 head and had real substance and real future. The small community around the school had grown into something with a name by this time, calling itself Archer's Creek because Noah's ranch had been there first, and the creek that ran through it had to be called something, a naming that Noah accepted with the embarrassed practicality of a man who had not asked for it but would not refuse it. In 1882, their second child arrived, a girl they named Clara, after Inez's mother, whose full name was Clara Ann Kingsley. Clara was nothing like James. She was immediate and expressive and loud in her feelings, and she arrived in the world with opinions that she communicated without ambiguity, which led Noah to observe quietly to Inez one evening, with complete and adoring sincerity, that he thought Clara was going to be remarkable, which was exactly what Inez had been thinking. Life at the ranch and in the small community growing up around Archer's Creek had the quality of something built right, not without difficulty, because difficulty was not something the territory allowed you to avoid, but with a structure that held when pressed. There were hard winters and a drought in the summer of 1883 that tested the cattle operation and required careful management and some lean months. There was a dispute with a neighboring rancher named Percival Grout, who believed Noah's eastern fence line was 10 yards further east than it actually was, and who expressed this belief loudly and with increasing antagonism through the early part of that same year. Noah handled Grout with the same steady patience he handled everything, going to a surveyor in Cimarron and getting the line properly documented, and then presenting the documentation to Grout without heat and with complete finality, which eventually resolved the matter, though Grout was never friendly afterward. Inez observed this process with the particular satisfaction of someone watching a person they love be exactly who they are in a difficult situation. The school continued to grow. By 1883, there were 31 students, ranging from a 5-year-old named Beatrice who cried the first 2 weeks, and then became the classroom's most enthusiastic participant, to a 14-year-old named Jorge, who was the son of one of the Mexican ranching families, and who had a mathematical ability that Inez recognized immediately and cultivated deliberately. She wrote letters on Jorge's behalf to the Territorial Education Board, documenting his abilities and arguing for access to further education, which eventually resulted in Jorge going to a school in Santa Fe at 16, which was not nothing, and which she counted as one of the genuine victories of her professional life. Noah built an addition onto the house in 1883, 2 more rooms, because James was 3 and Clara was 1, and the house that had been exactly right for 2 was becoming efficiently arranged for 4, but would need thought for 5, and Noah was a man who thought ahead. The addition took 6 weeks, with help from Marcus and Wallace and 2 other men from the community, and Inez kept the workers fed and kept the children out from underfoot, and occasionally appeared at the building site with opinions about where the windows should go, which Noah accepted with the attentiveness of a man who understood that her opinions about practical things were generally excellent. On the evening the addition was finished, after the workers had gone and the children were asleep, they stood in the new main room that was still smelling of fresh lumber and plaster, and Noah put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned against him, and they looked at the mountains through the new window in the growing dark. "I want to say something," she said. He looked down at her. "When you said this is as far as I go," she said, "that day in Cimarron when you left me at the church, I thought I was heartbroken and I refused to admit it for approximately 30 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. "I thought about turning around before I was a mile out of town," he said. "Why didn't you?" "Because I was trying to be reasonable," he said. "You had just arrived at the place you had been working to get to for months. I could not simply hand you a horse on the same day and expect you to change direction entirely." "No," she agreed, "you could not. But I want you to know," he said, and his voice had the particular quality it got when he was saying something completely true, "that the ride home was the hardest 30 miles I ever covered." She turned and looked at him. He was exactly himself in the lamplight, the scar on his jaw and the cedar eyes and the quality of steadiness and depth that had been visible to her from almost the beginning. "I know," she said. "I believe you." She kissed him then in the new room, with the mountains dark beyond the window and the smell of fresh lumber around them and the children asleep in the next room. And he held her with the same warmth and certainty he had always held her. And she thought about the stagecoach and the broken boot and the empty road and the single rider who had come up behind her with no particular hurry and had asked simply if she needed a hand. She had. It turned out that she needed considerably more than a hand, and that he had it to give, and that the arithmetic of that was one of the better equations she had encountered in a life that had been, in its own way, full of them. In the spring of 1884, Inez received a letter from her mother that said Clara, and Kingsley herself, was considering the journey west, that Marcus had written her such enthusiastic descriptions of the territory and the community growing up around Archer's Creek that she was beginning to wonder if Missouri still needed her quite as much as it had, now that Pete was 15 and capable and James's mill was doing well enough. Inez read this letter 3 times and then set it on the kitchen table and sat down and put her hands over her face for a moment, not from sadness. She wrote back immediately. She told her mother about the house, which now had enough rooms. She told her about the school and the community. She told her about the morning light off the mountains, which she described in 3 sentences that she thought were the best sentences she had written, because she had tried to make them equal to the actual thing. She told her mother to come. Clara Kingsley arrived in August of 1884, accompanied by Pete, who was now 15 and had his sister's brown-amber eyes and Noah's jaw set from the moment he got off the wagon at Archer's Creek and looked at the mountains, and who announced within 48 hours that he intended to stay permanently, which caused Marcus to clap him on the shoulder, and Inez to feel something resolve in her chest that had been asking for resolution since the day she left Jefferson City. Her mother was smaller than Inez remembered, or perhaps simply softer, because the grinding years of keeping things together after her father's death had given way to something more restful as the children found their footing. She walked through the house at Archer's Creek with a careful attention that Inez recognized as her own quality in its source, touching things, looking at things, making the slow assessment of a woman who does not form opinions quickly. She met Noah in the yard where he was coming in from the pasture, and she looked at him for a long moment in the way she looked at everything, and then she said, "My daughter says you are a good man." Noah held her gaze without flinching. "I try to be," he said. "I fall short sometimes." Clara Kingsley nodded. "That is the right answer," she said, and then she allowed herself to be helped down from the step by her son-in-law and went inside to find her grandchildren. That evening at supper, with all of them around the table that was now extended with a plank Marcus had made for exactly this purpose, Inez looked at the faces in the lamplight and felt something that was so complete it was almost hard to hold. Her mother, who had been afraid. Her brother, who had come west on faith. Her brother Pete, who had arrived with the territorial instinct of someone coming home. Her 2 children, James with his father's eyes and Clara with her grandmother's name. And Noah at the end of the table, who caught her looking and held her gaze with those weathered cedar eyes that she had first seen on an empty road in the territory when she was alone and furious and walking west on a broken boot. He raised his coffee cup very slightly, in a gesture that no one else would read as anything particular. She raised hers. The territory outside the windows was vast and dark and full of stars, the same stars that had been there when the Apache called it home, and when the Mexican families settled along its rivers, the same stars that had watched all the complicated and painful and sometimes beautiful history of this land before anyone called it New Mexico and drew lines through it. They would be there long after this table, these faces, these particular overlapping stories of people who had found each other across the red earth and the sage. But they were there now, and now was where Inez Kingsley Archer had always lived her life most fully, in the particular and present and real. Pete stayed, as he had announced he would, and proved himself useful on the ranch within the first month in the way young men with capability and work ethic always do when given genuine work. He was quick and strong, and had a natural understanding of horses that exceeded even Marcus, and Wallace, who was selective with his praise, told Noah privately that the boy was the best natural horseman he had seen in years. Noah told Inez, who told Pete, who went red to the ears and immediately tried to pretend he had not cared at all, which was the most Missouri thing any of them had done in some time and made everyone who knew Missouri laugh with recognition. Clara Kingsley settled into the community of Archer's Creek with the quiet adaptability of a woman who had been managing difficult circumstances her whole life and found this set of circumstances, by contrast, remarkably good. She was respected almost immediately by the other women in the community for her herb knowledge and her practical good sense, and she became an informal presence in the school in the way that grandmothers with time and wisdom sometimes do, sitting in the back on certain days, and offering the specific quality of patient attention that a roomful of children sometimes needed beyond what a single teacher could provide. Inez was grateful for it more than she said, because the school was growing again, and the demands of it were growing with it, and having her mother's calm presence in the room on the hard days was a comfort she had not known she needed until it was there. In the winter of 1885, there was a particularly hard freeze that came down from the mountains without adequate warning and caught two of the families in the community with insufficient wood supply, because the autumn had been mild and planning for a mild winter had seemed reasonable and had proven wrong. Noah organized the response to this with the same practical efficiency he brought to everything, and the community pulled together in the way communities do when the choice is cooperation or suffering, and everyone got through it, though it was close for a few days and everyone knew it. That freeze brought the community closer together, which hard things sometimes do, and the spring that followed felt genuinely celebratory in the way springs do when they follow real winters. There was a community gathering that May in the field behind the school, with tables of food brought by every family and music provided by a fiddle player named Samuel Torres, who was the father of 3 of Inez's students, and who could play with an exuberance that made dancing feel inevitable. Noah danced with Inez at that gathering, in the open field with the mountains behind them and the children running between the tables and their families around them, and it was nothing like the single dance they had shared at Rialto in Cecilia Montoya's trading post in the spring of 1878, and it was also exactly the same, because the essential quality of it was unchanged. 2 people who had found each other on an empty road and had the sense to hold on. James was 5 years old and had decided he wanted to dance too, and was attempting to do so in the vicinity of his parents, with the creative freedom of a child, who is entirely confident in his own interpretation of every activity. Clara, at 3, was sitting on her grandmother's lap and watching her brother with an expression that even at 3 carried the specific skepticism of a younger sibling, who has already assessed the older one accurately and found him occasionally ridiculous. Inez danced with her son, which required abandoning all conventional form and simply following the movements of a 5-year-old who believed dancing was primarily about how high you could jump without losing your balance. And she was laughing so completely by the end of it that she could barely stand, which was the kind of laughing she had not done enough of in her first 24 years and was making up for with compound interest. Noah caught her when she was catching her breath from the laughing, put his arm around her, and she leaned against him while James continued his solo interpretation of the fiddle music, and Clara continued her evaluation from the grandmother's lap, and the mountain stood patient and enormous and entirely indifferent to the human happiness assembled at their feet. "I want to tell you something," he said quietly under the noise of the gathering. "Tell me," she said. "I was wrong when I said this is as far as I go," he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with those eyes that she knew now in every possible light and quality. "I said it because I meant I was going back to my ranch, but it was the wrong framing. There is no as far as I go when it comes to you. There has never been." She put her hand against his chest, feeling the steadiness of him, the particular warmth that she had trusted from almost the first. "I know," she said. "I wanted to say it out loud," he said. "Then I am glad you did," she said. The fiddle played on, and the children ran, and the mountains kept their watch, and the territory stretched away in every direction under a sky that was enormous enough for all of it, for every complicated thread of history and hope and ordinary human love being lived out in its dust and light. Inez Kingsley Archer, 24 years old from Missouri once, standing on an empty road with a broken heel, and a letter of employment and a plan. Then 31 years old in a field in the New Mexico territory with her mother and her brothers and her children and her husband. Thought about the stagecoach driver named Burl and thought about the empty road, and thought about the rider coming up behind her with that unhurried canter and the simple question. "You need a hand." She had. And the hand had led here, to this specific field under this specific sky, with these specific faces and this particular music and this man who had walked his horse 6 miles, so she would not be tired, and wrapped her heel in rawhide cord, and ridden 30 miles to a classroom doorway with his hat in his hand, and said this is as far as I go, and then come back, and kept coming back. Because some distances are not distances at all, but the shape that love takes when it is being honest about itself. She leaned up and kissed him once, briefly, in the middle of the field, in front of God and the mountains and their entire community, which caused James to stop dancing and make an expressive noise of 5-year-old protest, and Clara to say something from grandmother's lap that, at 3, was not quite a word yet, but clearly had an opinion inside it. Noah laughed. Fully, completely, the one she had always wanted more of. And she kept it the way she kept the other important things, pressed close against the heart, like a letter that promises arrival at something worth the journey. The fiddle played on. The stars came out over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, one after another, with the abundance and deliberate generosity particular to that sky, to that territory, to that impossible and terrible and beautiful country where 2 people had found each other on an empty road in the spring of 1878 and had been finding each other, in every way that mattered ever since.